We're here on the west side of Ocala to have a conversation with Dr. Nat Baggarly and his delightful wife, Claire. Dr. Baggarly, are you originally from Florida?
No, I'm not. Originally, I came from Kentucky.
Is that where you went to college?
Yes, it was. That's one of three places. I'm a graduate of Kentucky, the University of Kentucky, and the University of Florida, and the Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale.
Wow. When did you begin teaching?
When I graduated from University of Kentucky as a music teacher, I actually started right before I graduated because one of the local student bodies from, can I go ahead?
Yes.
I think it was before you graduated, and there was a high school that the director and his wife just left overnight.
They left in February overnight, but no one could mind. They left a pay stub and everything. Just took off.
And so someone from that school came to see you.
Yes.
To be able to ask you to take over and take the band, take them to contest, and finish out the school year.
Well, they asked the head of the music department to recommend one of their students, is what happened, one of their students. So I accepted that. And this was in Winchester, Kentucky, which is just about 10 miles northeast of Lexington. And then I also, after graduation, they asked me to take on the job, so that was my first year of teaching.
And that was in 1949?
Yes, it was.
Wow, wow. Okay, and then I understand you were in the armed forces also.
Yes, I was, the Air Force. Because when my final year out of University of Kentucky, I had to fill out a draft form. And did drafted in the Air Force. So by the time that rolled around, I used to hear that teachers would be exempt. That isn't true. And so they sent me a letter, they wanted me to draft me. So I went into the Air Force rather than the Army.
Yeah, at that time it was the Korean War, and so all young men were being drafted unless they had a special exemption.
Right.
Did you serve as a band member in the Air Force?
Yes, I was in the band in Washington, and also in several of the bands, especially Birmingham and that area of Alabama, as well as Washington, D.C.
Wow. Okay.
But your final stay was the ceremonial band at
Yes.
in Washington.
Yeah.
Quite an honor. Quite an honor.
Thank you.
You began your teaching career when there were challenges for you. What sort of challenges did you encounter as you began your teaching career, and how did you overcome them?
Well, the biggest challenge I found was with the administration at my school in Gainesville. And they were opposed to anything about FBA, which I rolled into that challenge. And by talking with the principal, I finally talked him to letting us be into the FBA concert, and that got us started. So I was there a couple of years before I had permission to do that. Mm-hmm. And it turned out, especially with our help from Reed Poole and other people from the university, it turned out to be beneficial.
This was at PK, and PK at that time, being an experimental lab school, they didn't really want to have a whole lot of competition between students or those types of things happening, so he was not allowed to do any kind of competing. Didn't want to have the students have their psyches.
The students wanted more than anything to enter FBA and take advantage of the contest situation. And because I convinced them it wasn't a contest, it was each band was evaluated on how well they do. So I try to encourage bands to do just exactly that. They abide by the principle and the goals of PK and FBA.
Well, it's kind of amazing that you started your teaching career in 1949, and here we are filming you with a video camera that's run by batteries, and we're setting it out over the internet, which is kind of the cutting edge of technology.
Yes, right.
What sort of technologies did you have at your disposal when you started teaching?
Well, I had very little, but I picked up on something that came along about that time called television. Because I could see a wonderful experience, and I'm just thinking through what we did. We didn't look at how bands look like when they're on the stage, and that kind of situation, which is very important. So when television came along, I thought, well, why don't we try something like that? I dreamed up the idea of televising the bands in concert when they would attend the FBA concerts, and that went over very well. And how I did it, which might be of interest, is that we had them sight read. We had them play on the stage, and then they go in and take the band into the library, and you get to see the shows then how they look. They just played their concert numbers.
So there was immediate feedback for them.
Right,
Yes.
immediate feedback. Beautiful that you say it that way. And we found them to be one of the first in the nation. And Dick Bowes heard of this, and he got together with me with some meetings and published it in the Instrumentalist.
We think it was published in the Instrumentalist. We're not quite sure. We checked. It could have been
I've seen it. Seen the article.
You've seen the article.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh,
So
okay.
I won't get that. There you go. So yes, that was a cutting edge, and he's always been ahead of the time with technology, because even at the college, he began computer-assisted instruction in the 80s?
Yes.
In the 80s at Brevard Community College, and getting the students used to this new thing called a computer on how to learn music theory and other coursework. So he had that going as well.
Fantastic. You have a very interesting nickname of Tink. How did that come about?
Well, I'll tell you how it is. When I was a small boy, my father was doing the dishes, like most men. and so I was in there with him, and I was messing around as a young child in the pots and pans. So he happened to say, "Come here, you little tinker," like that. And he called me, meaning I flew in the pots and pans. My sister, who happened to be in the kitchen at the same time, my elder sister, heard that, and she thought he was calling me, but he was calling me, so that's my name. So then she picked it up as a young child, and it's so stuck at that time. That was it.
What would you like to tell young directors or directors just starting out? What sort of advice would you like to give to them?
I think if you can get students, remember you're selling a product to students. That's not a required subject, band isn't, and orchestra and chorus is not required. And you have to think what behind all this. So I've always felt that one of the big things, discipline is very important in a band room, but not to the point where it was not liked by the students. And so I acquired a demerit system, and I use that as a tool to have the proper discipline in the band room.
So that the students discipline themselves.
Yes.
So they were giving
Right.
demerits in the officers.
And I set their grades that way. They knew that they were presenting the grade. And so they didn't want to talk. I'd turn and several things like that. Being late to productions and rehearsals and those kinds of things that you can come up with what you want to see in your band room. And that was, for me, one of the few things that I think really worked.
It did for maintaining discipline.
Yeah.
It certainly did. And I think also, like you said, you're trying to sell a product to the students to make them want to come back to the classroom.
Right, exactly.
And so there was a lot of, even though there was a lot of discipline, there was a lot of levity and a lot of joy and a lot of enjoyment in the classroom.
That's right.
And striving for higher standards than what the students even thought they could do.
Yeah, they would come in the band room and listen to records and that type of thing, which was one of my goals, having them listen more to music and establish good goals as that. And we wanted to have the band room a place that was warm and welcome the students to it. And it happened to be that way. That's the way the students did it.
Well, speaking of warm, teaching in Florida in the 1950s, before the times of air conditioning, it must have been warm in your band room.
Yeah, when I first started teaching, I had band practice in the auditorium in Norman Hall at the University of Florida campus. And we sat up there among the just scenery for the place and just all kinds of things like that. So when we finally, 2 years after I took the job, they finished the school and we went to it and it had air conditioning. It's amazing how people came to visit me.
The band room, I think the band room, the music suite, was the only area, and I think in the auditorium too, that had air conditioning. All the other rooms did not. So that was also a draw for the students to take band. But so he did have a little bit of air conditioning.
So there you are, taking care of technology again.
Yes.
Yes.
I convinced the administration that the instruments, not the students, but the instruments were very important, and they couldn't stand the changes of temperature like you have in that. The instruments might ruin, and the administration bought that discussion.
Okay. Is there anything about your personal character that has helped you achieve your high level of excellence and maintain your passion for all these years?
Well, I have to jump on my wife's side in that the humor and joking with students, because they like that. And for instance, I will give you one story that lived with us. My last year, just about, one day the bunch of students and myself and the choral director went out to lunch. And while the students didn't know, the choir director, he went downtown first, I believe it was, and then came back with the music, I'm sorry, not music, but with a ticket
A parking ticket.
Parking
He
ticket.
went downtown, got a parking ticket.
And then when he came back and he told us, you were I think in the group.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah, and yes, he had the ticket. He brought it back and he gave it to me, and he wasn't going to pay it. He just wasn't going to pay it. So he gave me the ticket. So I took it and then we had to get back to work at that time. The lunch duty was over with. So I kept hold of the ticket. And finally it showed up in his roll book. And then that ticket folded up some later on that and one of the musical instruments. I think it was a tuba at that time. And
So the ticket went flowing back and forth and back and forth.
with the teachers and students involved. And it finally ended up well, let me put it this way. We were having busy schedules and rehearsals time at that time. And the first clarinetist came up to me and said, there's something wrong with my instrument. It does not play. And I blew on, because I'm a clarinetist, and I blew on, and sure enough, it wouldn't play. And I took the barrel joint off, and there was that ticket. So that's the time of things that we scheduled and had jokes among each other. And it was a lot of fun that way.
But they were never mean. They
No.
were always
Yes,
lighthearted and fun.
lighthearted, right. And they respected each other. That's very important.
What do you do to keep your edge? What do you do to keep the passion flowing?
I think mainly with trying to achieve excellence in the band or for performance better and this type of
Are
thing.
you talking about for yourself or for band directors?
Well, for both,
But,
actually.
yeah, yes, I think they should, because it helps things. This idea of leaving toward excellence this way, see, and it helped us for the students to recognize that. And this would be a clarinet soloist, a clarinet quartet, or ensembles and this type of thing. And we encourage that a lot for directors to have their students take part in contests themselves and rehearsals and so on, because the label they get and the rating they're rated is the students, not the teacher. And I would think to keep the edge is for the students, the faculty to take more part in directing and so forth, helping the students along in what they're trying to achieve. And I have heard where some directors have turned their students loose just to take part in some ensemble and something like that, not helping at all. And they hear them and they play in contests and oh dear. So I would encourage them to keep the edge, the idea of keeping excellence in what they do.
Well, you've certainly been a role model for a lot of people, not only your younger students, but for band directors and administrations have learned from you. And we appreciate your efforts in those areas. Now we have MP3s and ability to download music from the internet. Makes it very achievable and attainable. But in the early 1950s, you didn't have that sort of technology. What did you do to bring music to your students?
Well, I was writing arrangements at that time, or trying to, and if I needed something, I'd try to write it out, or get someone to write it out. And, that's just like music is presented to you custom-like. And that's one thing that helped me, and encouraged listening. I think it's very important to get the idea of what it's done. Like and
playing the old vinyl records.
yeah,
For your students.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's one thing I felt was very important in the bands and listening to other bands. You can encourage so much that you have in here, or small ensembles. And I felt listening was very important. And if they could take private lessons, I encourage that as well. And see the students grow is very important.
When the new building was built at PK, I don't know whether you had a hand in what was going to be put into it, but there was a recording studio, which was a little unheard of back in the 50s and the 60s. So there was a recording studio, so the band could have rehearsals recorded on, of course, the big reel-to-reel tapes at that time, not the cassettes or anything else like that, and then to have it played back, immediate feedback and playback. I think that was
That's right.
very important.
Very helpful. It was.
Now that you're in retirement, what are you doing to keep the creative juices flowing?
Well, I mentioned to you earlier about the arrangements I wrote, because I wanted to find out how the finale system was used. Now, prior to this time, I really didn't do anything. I just wanted to relax and be retired. But that didn't last very long. And I want to keep going. And I discovered through the finale system, it made a lot of things easier in writing arrangements and so forth.
Because you could get immediate feedback.
That's right. They're done right away. And I think that did a lot to help me grow.
So he's finished up some arrangements for middle school jazz band or first year high school jazz band of just stock commercial big band sound music. And he's finished up some of those just a couple of years ago.
That's fantastic.
I might mention this. In my last year in the Air Force.
That's going back now. We're now going back.
Oh yes, we're going back.
It's okay.
I was relieved of being on duty in the campus, in the Air Force Base itself, to stay at home and write arrangements, which I did. For instance, the biggest one I did was the West Side Story, and in a jazz form, and which I did, and it turned out fairly well, I would say. And I did that to keep myself going.
Well, do you have one short story that demonstrates what teaching and choosing the life you have chosen has meant for you?
Yes, I can think of one incident that would fill that bill, I think. When I was talking to my band at the first of the semester, I was talking to them about keeping their instruments clean and what they have to do. And
It's a silly story.
yeah, it's a silly story, but it's true. And so I was explaining to the students about how they would take care of their instruments and keep them clean, put them in the bathtub and let them soak.
That's the brass instruments.
Brass instruments. And I would like to mention that to make yourself very plain when you're giving instructions to students.
Yes.
So lo and behold, Ralph Hip is a student. I know he knows I was going to mention this. And he has an alto saxophone, and he heard about this bathtub bed. So he went home that night, took all his instruments apart and put it in the bathtub. And so he went to school the next day. He said, "Mr. B," they call me Mr. B. He said, "My horn won't play. I can't get it to do anything." So I said, "Well, let me see it, Ralph. There must be something wrong with it." So I looked at it, and lo and behold, he had put the saxophone in the bathtub.
Filled with water.
And what? Yeah. So he got a new saxophone for it.
Yeah. So the moral of the story is make sure that you be very
Make it clear.
clear to students.
It was brass. I mean, I couldn't argue that.
But I don't know exactly what the question was. But what was that? But that was a good story.
Well, it was a good story. It was a good story, and it shows your sense of humor, which is important.
Yeah.
What is now that you're retired and you are one of our FBA legends, and we come to you for advice and wisdom, what do you say? How can you demonstrate your satisfaction in choosing the life of a band director? Could you imagine yourself having chosen anything else?
I think when we had, this is an important time, when we had the television I just told you about, and how the parents came to me with cooperation and this way, and they were willing to help, and we got a way of putting the band together with the parents, and I feel that's very important to get them involved in it. Also, for the band directors to keep striving for excellence in whatever they do. It makes no difference, but that's very important, I found. And I fit into the framework of PK Young School because they were, I think, were busy trying to improve on education as best they could. And that was
with new innovative
yes,
ideas. But I think it was probably just the. She asked if you could see yourself doing anything else, and I don't think so because music is your life. I think when you're a musician, you just can't do anything else. You might try to do something else, but you're always drawn back to doing music, to making music, to playing music, to writing music, to having students play music with you. I think you just have that. There's nothing else you can do. You're just drawn to it.
I can tell you about making up my mind to be a band director is when I was in elementary school. I was playing with some students there at the elementary school. It's close by. And I saw the band come in wearing these fine uniforms. And I thought, oh boy, that's for me. And it stuck with me all the time until the time it was serious in college, knowing that that's for me.
Well, actually, it was more in high school. It was more in high school because you were playing by then in high school, but even in high school, you had to take over as being a band director for a while because the band director was drafted into World War II. And there was nobody to lead the band because there was no other men around to come in to lead the band. So he ended up as a high school junior or senior? Junior, I think.
I was a senior.
Oh, you're a senior, having to be the band director. So he was the senior at his high school.
Yeah,
the
principal talked to me about being it and encouraged me to do it. It made arrangements in my schedule to do it. And I had one period off a day to work on the charts. I think was and bands in that day had to do the schedule was complete with say 12 football games, and we had to do a different one every time.
Different show every week.
Yeah, not like it is today when they.
So, not quite sure what the question was, but
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. Well, you have taught in so many different levels. You've taught beginners. You've taught high school. You've taught college.
And junior.
And what is the difference between them, or which one is your favorite? Where do you think you were most effective?
I think I was most effective on the junior high and first part of high school because these students were searching for an education to lead them in what they should be doing. And some of these, I could present band to them, of course, in a soft way, and not trying to push them. And the decision was up to them, and this type of thing. So I felt I was most effective in doing that. At that particular level, the kids are so excitable and a lot of energy and that type of thing. And I tried to put to good use.
Now that you're a member of the Role of Distinction for the Florida Bandmasters Association, we'd like to hear what you have to say about advice to pass on to future directors.
Yes, I think if they realize what their role of distinction is, as I have been blessed with, that keep your standards high, and no matter what you do, and keep it that way, and trying to achieve the high standards that we always have in music.
Right, and as you have said so many times, just do the best you can do every day.
That's right.
Every day, with humor and humility. And humility is very important. Let the students know that they are worthy.
Yes,
and that they are exceptional, no matter what their level. And you'll see every day.
Yeah, and they'll try to achieve it.
And they will, and that's the thing. They will try to achieve that level of exception.
Well, that's great advice. Thank you.
All right.
Well, we've come to the end of our half hour.
Oh,
and
marvelous.
It certainly flew by. We want to thank you so much for allowing us into your home and allowing us to interview you and to capture the essence of Tink Baggarly and his lovely wife, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.